Hey folks, here's a little tutorial on the listening quiz. So this listening quiz is a separate thing from the Norton listening stuff. Those are just supposed to be familiarizing yourself with the content in the book. Those are things that I would have done in class with you. This listening quiz is a little bit different. So I've created this study guide and I'm going to go through it with you so you know what to expect and how to study. So purpose again, the point of the listening quiz is to have students be able to recognize what time period a piece of music might be from. So if I played a piece of music, could you tell me, is it from the early time period, the Baroque time period, or the classical time period? So what I've essentially done is created this little cheat sheet. I don't know how to get rid of this little there. It's smaller, I guess. Yeah. So what we know at this point about the early music, and these things will help you to identify the music when you listen to it. So for example, early music was mostly vocal music. There wasn't a lot of instruments, lots of chanting, monophonic texture like the monks. And if there were multiple vocal parts, they tended to do a lot of imitative polyphony, which is where they sound like they're echoing each other. You will not hear brass and percussion or piano in the early music period. The Baroque music period has a little more going on because instrumental music is now important. The general rule is that Baroque music is elaborate and ornamented. It's very fancy sounding. String instruments are the primary instruments used. There's a big focus on soloists. The organ is a popular instrument. Opera comes about in this time period. Dido and Aeneas is one of the earliest English operas, and there is an example of that. The concerto is a style of music where it has orchestra and a soloist, again, going back to those focus on soloists. And Baroque dance suites, such as Bach's cello suites, which are also solo cello pieces. You still won't hear a whole lot of percussion, and the piano hasn't was invented at the end of this period, but really not used. So you don't hear piano in the Baroque music period. Classical period characteristics. Classical and Baroque music is going to sound a lot more similar. The early music period is going to stick out more than any others. Classical period is known for order and reason, and so that's influenced in its dynamic trends. So classical music will sound like it's very soft, and then all of a sudden it'll be loud, and then it'll be soft, and then it'll be loud again. As far as instruments, you hear a lot more brass and percussion in addition to the strings. And last but certainly not least, the piano is introduced and becomes a very popular instrument. So these are sort of the dead giveaways. If a piece sounds like it could be Baroque or classical, ask yourself, what instruments does it have in it? Listen for brass or percussion. If it has a lot of that, then it's probably going to be classical. Listen, if it's the organ, you know it's going to be from the Baroque period, but if you hear the piano, you know it's going to be from the classical period. So now let's go on to those examples. Here it's a YouTube listening playlist. There's 11 pieces on it, but I'm only going to test you on 5. You don't know which 5 yet. So if you use those sort of bullet points that I've given you to familiarize yourself with what qualities are from each period, and then listen to these pieces, you can also just memorize the way that they sound at the beginning. The first 3 are from the early period, the next 5 are from the Baroque, and the last 3 are from the classical period. So here's the playlist. Okay, so number 1 is an early period piece. So you play it.
Love scooping your cat's litter box?
Oh yeah, I do.
No, you don't.
Let's get past
But
this
they're still
ad.
scooping
Here we go. Okay, so it's vocal. There's no instruments. That's the first dead giveaway. It's also very echoey. Those parts are imitating each other. I think that early music tends to sound the most angelic. Okay, number 2. sort of started in the middle, but if I go back from the beginning, this is monks chanting. This is going to be early music. Okay. The third one and last one from the early period is Fair Phyllis, which is one of the pieces that the textbook discusses, so you should recognize it. Again, sounds angelic. There's no instruments, sort of echoing each other. Okay, no thanks. Okay, so those first three were all early music periods, so you can listen to those over and over again, or you could just memorize what the characteristics were. Okay, so the next one, number 4, is Vivaldi's Four Seasons. This is a violin concerto, so it's a featured violinist with orchestra. Notice the absence of brass or percussion and the fact that it features a soloist, and also what the soloist plays is going to be super fancy pants. Okay, so that's Baroque. The Royal Choral Society's version of the Hallelujah Chorus is next. This is written by George Friedrich Handel. He's a Baroque composer, and it's super fancy. It has more woodwinds in it. It's got orchestra. This one has a little bit of percussion, but it's still a Baroque piece. And it's also imitative. They imitate each other singing Hallelujah throughout the whole piece. So that's Baroque. You can hear my kids singing in the background. Next is Bach's Cello Suite. This is played by Yo-Yo Ma, who's a world-famous cellist. And it's a feature solo. This is a dance suite from the Baroque period. Next, we have our first little bit of opera.
Still scooping one of those
we're still talking about cat litter.
Where your cat has to step on poop to go.
Gross. Okay. This is an opera. Very ornamented, very fancy. Just look at the costumes. Remember, opera has costumes and scenery and a storyline just like a musical. But notice there's no piano, there's no brass, there's no percussion. This is Baroque. Okay. The last example from the Baroque period is an organ fugue. Very loud, very elaborate, very fancy. Okay, so the mere fact that it's an organ piece, I'm going to tell you dead giveaway on this playlist that it's going to be Baroque. Moving on to the classical examples, we're on the last 3. This first one is Haydn's Symphony number 94. It's called the Surprise Symphony because what this piece does is it will play soft, and then it will get to a point where it suddenly surprises the audience and plays loud. When it gets to the loud sections, it's going to feature brass and percussion, and that is going to be the giveaway that this is classical, not Baroque, but classical. Well, I'll let you listen to that on your own. You'll hear where it jumps out and is loud. Okay, next piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. You may recognize this. It's used in movies and TV all the time, and it's played on the instrument piano. So that is the dead giveaway that this is going to be classical period. Last but not least, Beethoven's probably one of the most recognizable classical pieces. And this does a lot of brass and percussion. You'll hear just in a second. So it's sort of soft and then loud. And this one involved all of those classical examples, those last 3, the Haydn and the last 2 Beethoven. It's probably the most percussion and brass heavy one. So that's going through that playlist. When you go to take the test, you won't be able to see the video. You won't be able to see what composer it is. You'll only be relying on your ears. So you can listen to these over and over again. I'm going to be playing it at the beginning of the piece. So Listen to 30 seconds or so on the test and then select which one you think it is, early, Baroque, or classical. So now you've listened, you have sort of a cheat sheet of things to listen for, and I wish you the best of luck. If you have questions, let me know.